Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. This is Dev Dive, of course, the premier video game developer interview show on the entire internet. I know I've been receiving accolades from all over, but today we've got someone really special here on the show. This is Xalavier Nelson Jr., the head of Strange Scaffold and director of a lot of games that we're going to get into. But primarily today, we're going to be talking about his newest release, I Am Your Beast, which is an action first-person shooter crazy game that I really enjoyed. And of course, I implore you to go to the Steam link, which I'll have in the description. You'll buy it yourself and play it yourself before listening to this, or listen to this and see what you think from the horse's mouth. But Xalavier, thank you very much for joining me. Anything you want people to know straight off the bat, just like they don't know anything about you. What's one thing you'd like to tell people?
I mean, these days, it's a lot less traumatic to talk about being locked in an attic with a neo Nazi when I was a teenager and having to talk my way out. But that didn't used to be as fun to talk about for obvious
Yeah,
reasons.
well, we've got video games to talk about today, which hopefully will be a little bit more lighthearted and
Sure
lift
do.
your spirits a little bit. But Iron Beast is it's a pretty crazy game, and I have to admit that I was not particularly familiar with Strange Scaffold before. I'd say this summer, probably early this summer, and it was Clickolding that came across my life, and I discovered you through that. But then the back-to-back releases of that game and I Am Your Beast have really kind of soldered me into your development process and the crazy variety of things that you're working on. So my first question for you, starting about I'm Your Beast, is what was the development timeline of this game like? I know you seem to balance quite a few plates on your fingers and head at all time from start to finish. What was development timeline of Iron Beast?
Development timeline for Iron Beast is really interesting because there's two ways to count it. When you're talking about game development, studios, especially on the indie side of the industry, it isn't just a time like making the game and making it for players. It's okay. The time we spent making the game and then pitching the game and then trying to find someone to fund the game. And if that funding doesn't occur, you're looking at how long your studio can survive, either to make the next idea or to find some way of bringing this project to fruition. It's a large reason why indie games, as much as they get acclaimed for their creativity, are also existing in such a space of risk. Is you can have someone putting months, if not years, of their life just to get the chance to say, I think this is cool for players. Will you please let me do this? Counting it from that perspective, from when we began to think about this project and believe in it, that's roughly 2.5 years, maybe even three. But the amount of time for this latest iteration was 9 months because we pulled that game together. We got over roadblocks. There was a couple of hiatuses, as well as trade up cancellations that endured internally because as the industry has gone through the really rough stuff it has in the last few years, that hit us too. And Iron Beast was laying dormant. It looked like it would be one of the projects we never resurrected. But in by the grace of God and our ongoing conversations with Frosty Pop, our amazing funder and collaborator, they saw that just lingering around our backlogs of projects and said, "This is really cool. Do you still want to do something here?" And we were like, "Well, maybe. Can you help us do that?"
If you can give me the money to do it, I'll do it.
At first, I turned them down because a lot of the assumptions that making a project that quickly and of this like scope and ambition we rely on is having enough materials from the backlog that were still relevant. So I went back. I went with Dan Pierce, who was someone who I'd already been collaborating with on a game at the time, the newly announced Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, but at the time it was still secret. And I was like, hey, Dan, I know you've been making a shooter and you really want to make something that's more kinetic and fluid. We were making one of those at one point. It stalled. As you know, the studio nearly closed down. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to do an audit on what we have to say to make sure that we can really pull off what we're talking about potentially achieving and resurrecting this project at all. Because I'm not going to take someone's money if I'm not going to have a really cool game to show at the end of it. And me and Dan went through that audit. We talked through the consequences, what shape this thing might be, started pulling other collaborators in our typical Strange Scaffold process. And so, yeah, the game got built kind of from scratch, utilizing some of the resources of the past in 9 months. But the truth of the matter is, it was the 2.5 years of both achievement and pain beforehand that set up that 9 months to fly.
Sure, yeah, and it seems like that's kind of a process that a lot of people go through of testing out ideas and things fail, and eventually it's the one that slips through the cracks that what everyone gets to see. But of course, I'm really glad that here at the top you kind of elucidate the audience on this development process, and the trial and failure of a lot of things is a lot more complicated than anyone sees on the outside. And one interesting about I'm Your Beast that I felt for me in terms of scope was really smart production value that really paid off for me, but again felt very economic, I guess the word is the production of the cutscenes, which are in between levels. It is something that is presented through text on just like a screen, so big block text with voice acting. And what's interesting about it that I found so economical while still maintaining engagement is that it's presented in this way of matching the dialogue of the voice acting with color, with timing, with the way that the text is typed up on screen at certain pacing, and it makes it feel like you're getting a glimpse into like a really aggressive argument or a snarky comment, but you're never seeing any facial animation. There's no motion capture. This is all just text, but it's color and timing and pacing that makes just text on a screen feel really, really dynamic. And I keyed that in from like the first time that popped up. I'm like, this is not only really cool, it's very stylistically interesting. I certainly want you to talk about that, but I also felt like this is a great use of resources because you get the sort of energy of voice acting out of it, but because it's text on a screen, it's way cheaper and easier to produce something like that. So, what was the process of working on those cutscenes like for you?
Yeah, that was something that was actually around from the beginning of the project. There's a McElroy Brothers podcast animatic that someone did called Glass Shark, which has lived in my head rent free for like the past 5-10 years. And it's kinetic text. Kinetic typography is an entire genre of YouTube videos.
Very popular on like YouTube Shorts and things.
Yeah, and it really surprised me that people hadn't done more with that as just another legitimate space to make choices and to have a utilization of the art form. So from the beginning of IMDb Beast, actually, Connect Text cutscenes were the goal and the point. We wondered if someone would beat us to the punch. We kind of hoped it would, because whenever you find a solution like that and it starts working, you go, man, I really hope other people get to use this for their purposes and the best of their games. But no, we didn't find anything quite like it. So by the time we started to make the latest iteration of the project, again, built in 9 months from the ground up, we're like, okay, so what's the absolute what do we absolutely need to deliver on these cutscenes? What are these cutscenes communicating in terms of color, timing, and text to give us what we need and what we can achieve within the time and resources we have? And the end product is the result of all of those really intentional thoughts and conversations and discussions. And I feel like that's so fundamental to how Strange Scaffold works in general. We don't say, let's put in this feature because people want this feature or have said they want this feature, or you have to have this feature for this genre. What does the game need? Because if we give the game what it absolutely needs to be the best version of itself, then we're going to make players happy and maybe show them something they never would have even known they could fall in love with had we not taken that leap to believe in the game and in our players.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. And I feel that those decisions to make things the way that works for this project is something that comes across very clearly. And I've played 3 of your games. I played Clickolding when it came out. I played I'm Your Beast. And I recently played An Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs, which is very different. Obviously, all 3 of those games very different. But I can feel when playing those games like, well, what's going to work for this thing? And there's nothing that necessarily runs all through each of those 3 games. And of course, you have many, many more. But
So, an airport for aliens can run by dogs, dog airport game, as we call it, because that's a really long name to say.
I'm glad I got it, by the way. I was thinking about like, I want to make sure I don't mess this up.
Yeah, you nailed it first try, which is not very common. I'll tell you. That's some champion shit right there. So the thing about dog airport game is early on it had currency, or at least, and we hadn't implemented the idea of currency, but like we talked about the design of like, oh, of course you have to buy a ticket There has to be some way for you to earn money. It takes you to other places. I don't remember if it was me or my lead collaborator on that one, Tom Bonita, who said it, but we were talking through the implications of it. And at some point, someone said, wait, so if you don't have enough money, would a dog turn you away? And the answer is, of course they wouldn't. And I believe after that, spurred by that, I made it to where you didn't just make it to where you could do one boarding pass at a time. You could ask for like 40. And dogs being who they are, really applying dog logic across the entire game, dogs would be like, heck yeah, you want 40 tickets? I'll give you 40 tickets. That made me and the project come alive in the sense of saying, like, we were going to have an entire currency system and trying to figure out how you can earn it in the airports and how that interacts with other gameplay dynamics. But really looking at what the game needed, what the game wanted. We've had people tell us nearly in tears that they loved the world that Dog Airport game gave them because it felt so true to the heart of how a dog would create structures that just care about you because you exist and because that matters. Yeah, whenever I hear about teams forced to put in features because that's what you have to have, or we had on El Paso elsewhere, we had publishers ask us if we would put in a skill tree. It was like a skill tree for diving in slow motion and fighting werewolf. You don't need one. It should start off feeling really good and it should end still feeling really good. But we're in a weird space in the industry right now where it's really hard as a developer to make those choices and to have those choices supported by your funders, publishers, and investors. So I'm really glad we get to be there and keep trying to deliver that perspective.
Yeah. And I liked what you mentioned about the moment when the project, when you talk about Dog Airport game, came alive for you. I'm curious for I'm Your Beast. Do you think that there's a moment where that kind of clicked into place for you? I know there's a lot of different design elements that I certainly want to get into talking about that game. Maybe some inspiration tonally or a music beat or a small design element that you just tweaked just slightly and it's like, now this really works. Any of that for I'm Your Beast?
I think I'm Your Beast, Dan had several of those moments. Daniel Pierce, my design collaborator on that, he's previously made games like 10 Second Ninja. So there's two, I think, big moments, at least, that stand out. We had a lot of them across the project, but just two I'll mention. Our level designers came back, and we had this original idea of this he's in the wall style fantasy of like you pop out of stealth, you take out a bunch of guys, go into stealth again, and you're doing these larger objectives while you tackle that. And our level designers came back to us and said, you know what? Every time we try to build a level where you can go into stealth and out of stealth, it feels artificial, it feels bad, and it feels at cross purposes with the fast-paced nature of this really satisfying first-person experience we want to deliver. Every time we make the levels just have a moment you choose where things go loud and you're just killing dudes and kicking them and their guns are flying in the air, that's when the game comes alive. And there's a choice you have there of, well, but stealth mode's so important for the gamers. And it's like, no, you have to trust your audience, trust your players. If it's what's better for the game, you will find players there. You'll find your players there. So we said, you know what, if that's what you're finding, then calibrate the levels towards that. And as you can currently see in our levels now, they do have elements sometimes of secrecy, but it is really about when Alphonse Harding shows up, it is a bad day for you. And you should really stop making him have bad days and leave. Just go. So I think when we stopped trying to echo things like Splinter Cell or Batman and lean into what worked best for our game and our dynamic and our scope, the game came alive, and that came from our level designers, and we listened to them, and the game has flourished as a result. Our level designers being Jim Brown and Kevin Ribeiro. The second, I'd say, major moment was it was right before Steam Next Fest, the week before, if not the weekend. And some people on the team have been talking about scoring. How do we handle scoring and timing?
Very important part of the game.
Very important part of the game. And I was like, Tear Down, which was a bigger inspiration for us than Neon White, but Tear Down and Neon
Very
White.
fun game. I just played that a few weeks ago. Yeah, I really like that game.
It lets you choose the moment when, timing pops off. Tear Down being these presenting these scenarios of you choose when to make the dominoes fall, and that is a timed experience that can be fast paced. We apply that to an action context. Different people in the team had been really advocating for, let's make a more complex scoring system. I said, there's no guarantee it will work. We'll have to balance all around it. We, as designers, know that the established precedent and the thing that works and that players will understand and connect with is the tear down neon white model. Just have a time. You can choose when the timer comes into focus if you want to give a fluid timing system, so it isn't just strictly when the level starts. But I really don't believe that having a more flexible scoring system will benefit us for this game, or that we have the time to launch it, because we were going to launch like 2 months after the next fest. We didn't have time to both react to player feedback and calibrate scores for every piece of the game, especially if the scoring system wasn't very good. But Daniel Pierce, he came back and he said, hey, here's a version of this that works within our scope, where when you get kills, here is the UI solution, here is the type of way it will impact our scoring, and it will not substantially either impact my work or the work of our level designers. I really believe in this. And I said, okay, at worst, it doesn't work, and after next fest, we rip it out. And that ended up being our signature feature, the entire idea of bullet storm style scoring and grading of kills that allow for this player expressivity alongside the speed, as well as different routes that different people may take to accomplish their goals. And yeah, to that degree, so much of I'm Your Beast, even down to the writing process, came from a process of discovery, asking what the game needed, and all the team members involved, like listening to each other about what that would produce and mean. And I'm really proud of how is a product of so many different people's imaginations and mutual consideration for making the best experience possible for the player.
Yeah. The scoring system, I think, is you said it was the key feature of the game, and I think that certainly, like, reading reviews for it and seeing discussion online, that definitely seems to be the case in terms of how people are speedrunning the game and choosing different routes and styles. And do you knock down the hornet's nest to make sure that they're dying from the bees, or are you exploding them? And I really like the fact that there are those options. But for me, the defining moment of the scoring system is, I gotta be honest, was a negative for me, which is the moment right before the last level of the game where you are hard locked behind getting an S rank on any level, or S plus or something like that, and you can't play the last level unless you do that. And so I'm curious, as one of the lead designers on this game, what went into making sure that that was a specific moment of the game, that this is something? Did you have conversations about, should this be required, should this not? Because I'm gonna be honest, I could not do it. And I had my friend who was able to do it take my Steam Deck, and he played it for like 30 minutes until he got me through that last level, so then I could play the last level and see the credits. It was something that felt like a wall to me. And I'm curious about the design process that went into choosing this being a moment of the game where you have to get a certain rank to progress.
I'm happy to elaborate on that. Yeah, there is really interesting considerations, especially as an independent game designer, because everyone will tell you need to make your game work for everyone. I think like a key way of understanding game design is saying, if you create an experience that everyone can play, but it is a 4 out of 10 for the person who enjoys it the least, then you haven't actually created an experience for everyone. The game is not able to express what it needs to express to be its highest version of self. So you'll actually see in some of our reviews people complaining about the level grading system, because there's a few different things where, like, we make you go back for bonus objectives, we make you go back for A ranks, and we try not to put that too much for the story mode. But the fact that we do it at all gets players into the psychology of playing through the game at what we feel to be its best. When you are in flow, going into a level and again finding yourself improving alongside it and rising to meet the game where it's at and exceeding the game at where it's at. So we had this discussion. We had an entire gating meeting of like, okay, we know we're going to have something that at precise points will make sure that the player has been engaging with the game and is not just kind of on autopilot mode not fully engaging with what the game has to offer or what it's saying, do we ever put it in an S rank? And I think I was one of the people who pushed really hard to say, you need one S rank in there. And the reason why is because there will be players who play this game and believe they will never be able to get an S rank. And a lot of those players, particularly because of how we balance those S ranks, it is actually within their reach. And by putting this, final stage of levels, the climactic conclusion of the game, those like last 3 levels and the culmination of the story experience behind that wall, you actually make sure that they have the cathartic wow moment of what they achieved that they never would have been encouraged to do beforehand. And it's a big inspiration point for that was actually from software, whether it's in, I think Sekiro is actually a really good example. They will have specific fights or battles, often very early on, that say, this is what we're doing. If it does not connect with you, you should leave. But if you can rise to meet this, you know what you need for the rest of the game, and this game is going to live in your head forever. And so we knew that there would be some division in it, but ultimately, because it was what was best for the game and encouraged the player to meet the game, we went with that call. And we see a lot of reviews end up like flipping and saying, I didn't like it at first, but damn it, I am your beast. Gosh dang it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously that's why I want to talk to developers about these kind of decisions, because as a player, I'm sitting there on this side and I'm like, I'm hitting my head against this level for like an hour and I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But obviously I found another way around it and I did end up finishing the game.
My
But
condolences to you to pull in a friend. Sorry about that.
but I appreciate the design intent that goes behind that, and I do think that that is a part of the reason why this game is resonating with people. Is the game feels controlled, and I like that. I like how focused it feels. We talked about the presentation in the cutscenes. I like how largely linear the stage design is. Of course, you can find your own paths if you want to kill this guy first or that guy first, but you're never really getting lost. And I think that again, it's these elements of focus in each of the elements of design that I thought really worked, and we see that resonating with people primarily through the reviews of this game, which on Steam are overwhelmingly positive. There's a set of ratings that your game can get, and the highest I believe is overwhelmingly positive. I don't know if there's like master mode or platinum or something that
Overwhelmingly positive is as high as it goes.
you've achieved that, and that's pretty rare, and especially with over 1,000 reviews on Steam. And as someone who follows you on social media, I've been following your process of being like, guys, look, this is something that's really could be really cool for our game, bumping up the number of reviews we have. If you want to leave a positive review, you should, and watch that number tick up over time. I would pull out my the Steam app on my phone and check how many reviews it got. Just, I'm like, I want to see it hit that 1,000, and it did. And one thing I'm interested to know as a developer, as a publisher, is what that crossing into that over 1,000 overwhelmingly positive reviews does for you as a member of this team, for funding, for publishing, for showing this project to other people. Why is that so important for to hit that barrier?
I think there's a lot of things, especially right now. One of the reasons you're seeing games get delayed. So there was recently a public statement put out by Paradox about how, first of all, they want to stop making RPGs. After Bloodlines 2, they're done. The entire games industry is going through a rough time right now. And Paradox in particular, if you look at what they used to do, they'd release something like Crusader Kings 2, and it would be at launch. It would be presenting what it is and presenting it to a degree compellingly, but it would be like flawed. And through both DLC as well as continual updates, they would work with the community really to shape that game into the final, fullest version of itself. But at a certain point, people in games became really, really afraid, especially at the largest investment sectors of our medium, to present anything that players didn't like. So much so that they wouldn't even give players a chance to say anything about it. I can tell you from personal experience, spiritual successors that people have been begging for years, or like direct sequels, games and genres that have been long abandoned, are getting axed, if not just like denied before they even come in through the door by the day, because even if it say will it be a hit, but it isn't going to make enough money to be a mega hit, publishers are saying, I don't know if we can afford to go forward with this. So Paradox recently made a statement that said that, and as part of a larger article, it said, release high quality games because winner takes all. So Paradox has been canceling a bunch of games very publicly. They've been pushing back game releases indefinitely to try to find a higher scope and polish point for each title. There's a degree of good there because we want to bring our players the best experiences possible. But when you're in the process also robbing them of choice or the ability to like work with them to build larger experiences the way that you did in the past, that's a real danger point. It's very new for our medium. And I think it is toxic to getting the highest variety and both breadth and quality of projects possible. And to bring it back to what you were asking, overwhelmingly positive is not something we expected this game to get.
Okay. Yeah.
You aim for hitting your audience and having a great game, but like we, especially with the focus of our projects, we are making choices among other things that can be divisive enough that we're like, we don't come in through the door even aiming for overwhelmingly positive. We just want to hit our players and keep surviving long enough to make the next game. And when you're making overwhelmingly positive, it is a marker of having right time, right audience, right place, been able to achieve a target, but it also can in the process become such a focus that it means that you lose the ability to, again, deliver what the next game your players didn't know that they needed.
Sanding down the rough edges so you don't poke someone on accident.
To stretch this metaphor to its limit, you can't hold onto a cliff if it's a completely smooth cliff. You will slip right off. And so, yeah, I'd say overwhelmingly positive when you're talking about funding and where it puts you as a developer. I think it's obviously a nice little feather in the hat, and it speaks to having reached a critical mass of players and fulfilled what they wanted your title to deliver and what they expected or exceeded their expectations for what it would deliver. It is indicative of an environment where instead of saying, how do we serve players, it's how do we get a metric. You can get really focused on review number and review score. That's something that we try to avoid internally. We shared the journey towards like, oh my gosh, people like this game so much, it gets towards 1,000. But when you set your bar as this game is only worth making if it will hit 1,000 reviews overwhelmingly positive, then all of the really cool, interesting stuff, including things that could be sequelized to hit that point as they discover something unexpected that really works, they never get to exist at all. So I'd say it's a very long way. It is very cool, a moment of deep pride and satisfaction and joy. We have 2 level packs coming for I'm Your Beast, one of which is hitting within the next month or so. But it's also just for us an indication to keep doing what we do. And the metrics may or may not be there. If we keep presenting this perspective, though, people will have reasons to go back and return to our older work and see what we have to say every place we've said it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that my favorite thing about what you mentioned there, and it's something I've actually found myself thinking about quite a bit as I explore a breadth of games history. I just played through the Leisure Suit Larry games, which are from the
Wow,
80s, and
okay.
they're all
Yeah,
text
deep
adventure
cut.
games. And I just beat Callisto Protocol yesterday, which is a new IP, more AAA game, and I'm interviewing indie devs. And one thing that I think is so interesting about the current marketplace of video games industry is that people complain about there not being enough new IP and about things being so safe and the risk averse nature that you were mentioning with publishers and with funding, how there are a lot of games that come out that are singular ideas, that are new IPs, that don't quite hit that, what you were saying, that threshold to be able to get a sequel, to get a further continuation that then becomes the successful version. You get a good 7 out of 10 game and you're like, this is good, but we're not continuing forward with that. And what I think is so special about Strange Scaffold is that you're able, through the variety of different voices and the speed at which you develop, to do almost entirely new IP and almost entirely new genres and trying new things. And that's what's interesting about the current marketplace, that you can exist in that space and find an audience for each project. And it's not like each project needs to speak to the audience that the last one did, but to get your spindly fingers and spider web out into trying to reach a bunch of different people at different levels. Obviously, I hope you find great success in doing that, but I think it's a note that teams of all sizes can take note from, of if something is good and finds a player base and you're able to work alongside them to build it up into something special, and then through sequels, that's where you really get it's the refinement that you really get something interesting. I like that you're setting the groundwork for that.
And for what it's worth, you also get refinement across games you work on, regardless of what they are. And that's part of why it's, I believe, legitimately toxic that so many games have these massive timelines and scales now. First of all, we know it's not a guarantee
Yeah.
for success or for delivering what players want or need. But the second thing is, like, when you've been in the industry for 10 years and you've worked on two projects, two 5-year projects, you've learned a lot, but your ability to be able to look at any genre you haven't worked in, especially, and say, here's what I'm going to do, and here's why it matters to a player, that's massively blinkered. People in film, people in literature, people in pretty much every other medium have so much more ability to refine their overall craft that game developers, back in the day, we had that.
Yeah.
From Software, being a good example, is they would release every year like 1 to 3 games. And more recently, they have a longer time between releases, but they've also retained so many people that that collective craft, Nintendo being another great example of the refinement of craft, not spending 8 years on every game allows you to achieve things you never could otherwise. Strange Scaffold has released 15 games in 5 years. We have 3 games coming out next year. I've worked on, at this point, either 100 games or just below it as a developer. That is a refinement of my craft with every title, with every release, good or bad. And that's part of why, as a developer, one of the things I've started to look for and that I mourn because I can't find it very often is like development perspective. I want to find this developer who, or this like combat designer who did something I loved on this game. I want to find what they did other places. And the industry so often drops and burns out people. You don't have that ability to do that. So Train Scaffold, we literally built our entire studio strategy around our next 3 games may not be your favorite game, but our 4th game may be the game that you remember for the rest of your life. Every game can and should be an expression that you want to follow because you believe in this voice and in how we do things. And without that audience of people who have been followed us for the previous 14 games, we wouldn't be at where we are for I Am Your Beast now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is each game then becomes a new opportunity to reach out to new people because it's not the 4th game in X series. They're each their own starting point. And I love that variety. I am someone who's very passionate about film and film history. I
Same
feel very
here.
similarly, and all right, we'll have to pick each other's brains about that. I feel very similarly about directors. I appreciate a director like Martin Scorsese who puts 5 years into each of his projects and it comes out fully formed and nominated for Best Picture and these things. But for me, it's the directors that do yearly or every 18 months films that really, really engage me. One of my favorite directors for close to no reason, but just because he's so interesting to me, is Ron Howard, a guy that's been working in the industry for 40 years, and he's done comedies and action movies and spy thrillers and dramas. And I'm currently watching through the filmography of Clint Eastwood, who has been doing this for 50 years in a really 45 movie. And it's like,
Even the Russo brothers, they got to where they are with the Marvel Cinematic Universe first doing Arrested Development with Ron Howard and Community, and like that lineage of creativity and how you can see some of the comedic beats, even in modern Avengers films, being rooted in their experience doing other stuff. When people make more things and have the ability to survive to do more things, they tend to, even if they are mediocre creators, refine their craft. The Russo brothers, by no means being mediocre creators, just something I'm talking about in this field. So I am deeply excited by, and I hope by, that as the industry moves towards more sustainability in the future, and that's a very rocky road towards where and how those moves are being made right now, unfortunately. But as the industry becomes more sustainable, we'll get more people like, say, a Josh Sawyer, who you get to see everything he's built and done and how it manifests.
I was just about to mention Obsidian. Oh my gosh, that was right on my mind. Yeah, I think that there are very few of the kind of teams that we're talking about in the games industry at this point. People are so committed to making the next project the big project rather than building towards it. And it's my favorite teams, or at least the teams that I find the most interesting, teams like Obsidian, as we were both on the top of our heads mentioning, or Don't Nod is a team that I've been really fascinated by recently because
Yeah.
they just do every 11 months or so they've got a new IP and they're trying out different things, and it's so fascinating. The final thing that I want to sort of talk to you about is about the other people in the industry that you think are doing it right. I feel like this year has been a very interesting year for kind of weirdo games coming out of left field and really hitting an interesting place. And I think that Clickolding in its own way is definitely one of those. We saw the success of Balatro just absolutely dominate this year. A game that I found really interesting, Infinite Craft, which is a browser game that I played hours of and absolutely loved. Content Warning, this game that totally reinvents the way that
Landfall, who you can always see their perspective and how they make these physics-based multiplayer things with their unified team perspective. Yeah, they made that game, I believe, Content Warning in like 2 or 3 months with like a splinter crew of like 3 people because of that shared lineage. Yeah, that's a fascinating story in itself.
Well, and I'm just curious. I mean, you obviously love Content Warning as well, and you've probably played some of the other ones I'm talking about. But what are other kind of weirdo games in this area that you find like reflects that sort of energy and perspective that you hope to see more of in the industry as a whole? Are there any recent games that kind of come to mind?
I think a lot of the stuff that mirrors what I look for in games as both a player and developer is found in the industry as it used to exist. Even Activision Blizzard used to publish like 20 games a year.
Yeah, yeah.
20 years ago, and that has been reduced down to like one a year, and they have their live service projects, and that's about it. And some years I don't know if Activision outside of Call of Duty even releases anything new. I think that there are some cool indie creators that are continuing to just like do their own thing. There's one of them, Deep Root Interactive. Ms. is on Twitter, made Endoparasitic, if you've heard of that game. Ms. makes games with this very calculated aesthetic and aesthetic choices. Those choices culminate in really interesting games that come out pretty consistently. Things like Rot Flesh, which is still a game I don't quite believe exists. It's stunning in that regard. You also have creators like Antonio Freire. He's making As Timer Surrenders right now, but he's basically been bit by bit by bit by bit working his way towards being able to make a full Metal Gear Solid game of its own right. No Time Surrender looks a lot like Metal Gear Solid, and it's because he's literally been building a tool set for making a Metal Gear Solid type game through divergent different games, like releasing like 1, 2, 3 a year. It is, to be honest, rare to find people who work like Strange Scaffold or who build that audience and interact with them so consistently in the way that we do. I don't say that to uplift us. I say that as a mourning point because I wish there was more people I could collaborate with in this regard. Frosty Pop, who we work with in our funding sector, or who funds us rather, they are one of the few who works like this, and that's why we work together, because we say better, faster, cheaper, and healthier as our studio motto. And they're like, we're going to release beautiful things on time and on budget. And we were like, what? You too?
Hold on, someone else is doing it? Yeah.
I look forward to a world where where it is not seen as a lack of ambition to ship a game on time. Because when we get past that point and that logical fallacy as an industry, we will be able to discover more of what can or would be someone's next favorite game in an unexpected place. Instead of waiting for it to emerge out of an outlier or kismet, we can create the conditions for that to happen intentionally.
Yeah, and I think that's a hopeful note to end on that then reflects sort of the energy that you're putting into your development and your studio. But thank you, Xalavier, very much for joining me for talking about your game, about the industry, about your thought process. And I hope everyone here who's watching enjoyed it. Of course, again, I will leave the link down below in the description to buy I'm Your Beast on Steam. I also recommend one thing I love that you at Stream Scaffold do is you have a bundle of all of your games on Steam that lets you get them for like 10-15% off or something like that. And that's just a really cool way
It
to
also multiplies.
celebrate your catalog.
So if you during a Steam sale, I'll be honest, if you wait for our next Steam sale, get the entire collection, and then the next time we release a game, you will get that at launch for like 25-30% off. And that's how we kind of want to reward the people who are following us like their favorite director and musician. We appreciate that. And we want to provide reasons to keep showing up.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope everyone enjoyed. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you so much.